5 ignored warnings, 4 desperate calls, 3 unreturned messages, 2 missed chances, 1 life lost forever. Alice Ruggles asked for help. She followed the system. But the system wasn't fast enough to protect her. Beneath the surface of smiles and silence, danger was taking shape, unseen, unheard, until it was too late. Stay with us. This story deserves to be heard. On a quiet Christmas Eve in 1991, Sue and Clive Ruggles welcomed a daughter into their world. They named her Alice. From the very beginning, she radiated a light that warmed everyone around her. Friends and family would later describe her as someone who could brighten even the darkest room. A young woman with a quick wit, a compassionate heart, and a vibrant energy that drew people in with ease. Alice wasn't just loved, she was cherished deeply, admired not only for her humor but for the way she made others feel seen and included. Growing up in the peaceful village of Turlangton in Leicestershire, Alice was the third of 4 siblings in a close-knit household. Their days were filled with laughter, countryside walks, and an unspoken bond that made their family unbreakable. Alice attended Leicester High School for girls, and her academic journey would eventually lead her north to Northumbria University, where she pursued product design. Yet it wasn't just her creativity that defined her, it was also her athletic drive. At just 11 years old, she discovered fencing, a sport that would become one of her greatest passions. With relentless determination, Alice rose through the competitive ranks. She represented both Leicestershire and the East Midlands region multiple times and captained the fencing team at Northumbria. Her proudest moment came in 2012 when she claimed victory in the women's épée at the Leeds Open. By then, Newcastle had become more than just a university town to her. It was home. She stayed after graduation and began working at the Newcastle hub of a major communications firm. Thanks to her dedication and infectious spirit, she quickly earned a promotion to site coordinator. It was in late 2015 that a new chapter began. Alice met a man named Dylan, known to his friends as Harry, a lance corporal stationed in Edinburgh. At the time they connected online, he was serving in Afghanistan. Their conversations flowed naturally and soon evolved into a long-distance romance. When they finally met in person in January 2016, things seemed promising. Dylan presented himself as attentive and kind. And to those watching from the outside, Alice appeared genuinely smitten. They spent meaningful time together both in Newcastle and Edinburgh. By summer, she even brought him along on a family holiday, where the two seemed inseparable. But behind the smiles and snapshots, something more fragile was beginning to form, and the first quiet cracks in their relationship were already taking shape. It started with subtle shifts that only those closest to Alice could perceive. Once the life of every gathering, she began to retreat into herself. Her laughter, once spontaneous and infectious, became infrequent. She stopped reaching out to friends and often declined invitations she would have once embraced with excitement. The vibrant energy that defined her slowly gave way to quiet withdrawal, leaving those around her confused and concerned. Those changes, they would later realize, weren't just circumstantial, they were signs. Behind closed doors, Dylan's demeanor had changed. His words, once affectionate, turned sharp and fault-finding. He criticized Alice's choices, her appearance, her friends. The emotional weight of his disapproval pushed her further into solitude. She lost noticeable weight and grew distant from the people who had once been her strongest support. After tensions rose between her and her housemates, she moved out and relocated to a modest ground-floor flat in Gateshead, sharing it with a kind coworker named Maxine, who welcomed her without question. Then came the messages. First from strangers. Women Alice didn't know reached out, revealing they too had been involved with Dylan during their relationship. The sense of betrayal was immediate and overwhelming. Alice ended things with him for good in August, firm in her decision, but Dylan refused to accept it. The flood of texts and emails that followed were relentless. Some were pleading, full of false remorse, others veiled with anger and accusations. He even contacted her family, referring to her mother as if she were his own, attempting to manipulate her loved ones against her. The more she tried to distance herself, the more he tightened his grip. What had begun as a relationship rooted in charm had twisted into something far more invasive. And yet, Alice had no idea that the situation was about to escalate beyond anything she had imagined. Despite everything, Alice's instinct in the beginning was still to show compassion. She remembered the man Dylan had pretended to be, the attentive partner, the affectionate soldier, and part of her wanted to believe he was just struggling to accept their breakup. But it didn't take long for his behavior to make that hope impossible. The messages piled up day and night, overwhelming her with emotional pressure. Her attempts to remain civil were met with manipulation, her silence with threats. Left with no other option, she severed all lines of contact. That act of self-preservation seemed to provoke something darker in him. He found his way into her digital world, gaining unauthorized access to her private accounts. It was there, deep within her social media history, that he discovered something he couldn't bear: a photo, a hint, a clue that she had begun seeing someone new. Mike was an Army officer, quiet and kind, offering Alice a sense of safety that had long been missing. When Dylan found out, rage took over. He contacted Mike, spewing lies and fabrications, attempting to sabotage what little piece Alice had rebuilt. On the last evening of September, Alice experienced a new level of unease. Someone rang her doorbell again and again, only to vanish when she checked. She didn't need to see his face to know who it was. Hours later, she caught movement outside her bedroom window. There, on the sill, sat a box of chocolates and a bouquet of flowers. Just beyond the glass stood Dylan, hands raised, slowly backing into the darkness. He left town shortly afterward, but not before leaving a chilling voicemail, thinly veiled beneath false remorse and eerie calm. Though the night passed in silence, Alice couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted. What once seemed like desperation now felt calculated, and deep down, she knew this wasn't over, not yet. The evening had grown heavy with silence when Alice, her nerves frayed, finally reached out for help. She dialed the non-emergency police number, her voice trembling with the weight of everything she had kept bottled inside. Over the past 3 months, she explained, she had ended a relationship that had turned increasingly invasive. Since then, Dylan had infiltrated her privacy, accessing her phone and social media, and relentlessly messaging her despite her repeated pleas for distance. What alarmed her most wasn't just the digital intrusion, but the physical one. She recounted the unsettling events of that night in detail: a knock at the door with no one on the other side, then another and another. Each time she looked through the peephole, the hallway was empty. The situation escalated when she heard noise outside her bedroom. She lived on the ground floor, and when she dared to open the curtains, she found flowers and chocolates resting on her windowsill. Dylan had been in her garden. He had sent a message beforehand saying he had been waiting there since early evening. Though he had walked away, the encounter left her shaken and unsure of what might come next. The officer on the line calmly informed her that this pattern of behavior was consistent with harassment, a criminal offense. They outlined her options, including legal orders to keep Dylan away. Alice, holding back tears, asked to proceed with the formal action. She provided Dylan's name, explained that he had made contact through various channels, including email and a fake social media account, and added that he had already driven a long distance to reach her. It was all becoming too much. She wanted protection, and she wanted it quickly. While the officer promised to help arrange an appointment and begin the necessary paperwork, Alice hung up with no real sense of closure. The system had been engaged, yes, but would it be fast enough, strong enough, to truly stop what had already begun to spiral out of control? After Alice's report, the police formally categorized the situation as harassment and issued what is known as a police information notice. Though not a legal order, the PIN served as a formal warning to the individual involved, advising them that continued contact could result in criminal charges. It carried no criminal record and required no admission of guilt, but its issuance was a clear indication that the authorities were now aware of the unfolding pattern. On October 3rd, the message was delivered through internal channels, a method that, while officially permissible, felt impersonal given the severity of the matter. But even this intervention failed to serve as a deterrent. Just days after receiving the warning, Dylan sent a parcel to Alice's flat. Inside, she found a handwritten letter along with a few personal belongings, all of which carried the weight of carefully constructed guilt. The message inside the envelope was manipulative and designed to provoke an emotional response. He claimed to know she had contacted the police and blamed her for the consequences he now faced. He wrote that his devices had been confiscated, a claim that was later proven to be false. The letter closed with him expressing a hollow farewell, stating that he was returning all memories of their time together and wished her happiness with someone else. He assured her she would never hear from him again. For a moment, the tone seemed final. But Alice had heard such promises before, and even as she held the letter in her hands, there was an unshakable sense that this was far from the end. Not long after receiving Dylan's parcel, Alice contacted the police once again. Her voice was calm but weary as she explained that the man previously issued a police information notice had sent her another message. This time, it arrived in the form of a letter accompanied by printed photographs and a notebook they had shared during their time together. The content itself was not explicitly threatening, but it carried an undertone that left her unsettled. Dylan had written that all he now possessed was a pen, some paper, and a music player. He insisted that this would be the last time he ever reached out. The operator on the call asked routine questions and took notes before informing Alice that someone from the appropriate department would contact her to follow up. There was no clear timeline, and the person she spoke with could not confirm if it would be the same officer handling her case. Though the system appeared to be in motion, Alice hung up with a growing sense that the urgency of her fear was being met with procedural indifference. She was left to wait again. She shared her frustrations with those closest to her, revealing a chilling belief that lingered heavily in her mind. Alice told her sister, Emma, that it seemed like the authorities would only take real action if something terrible happened. She lived in a state of constant unease, always glancing over her shoulder, never feeling entirely safe. Each day, a colleague drove her directly to her door, where she would quickly lock herself inside and check every window before trying to relax. But there was little comfort to be found. Unbeknownst to her, on the evening of October 10th, Dylan once again made the long drive south. Under the cover of night, he slipped into the back garden of her flat, took photographs of her window and bathroom, and vanished back into the shadows. By morning, Alice would have no idea that he had come so close again, and this time, he was not done. That afternoon, Alice had wrapped up her workday without any sign that something was wrong. Her supervisor, Paul, offered her a lift home as usual and dropped her directly at the entrance of her flat around 5:30. Once inside, she exchanged messages with friends, sharing excitement over a new outfit she had just bought. She also chatted briefly with her boyfriend, Mike. The conversation flowed naturally until, quite suddenly, it stopped. The final message was sent, and then nothing more. Just before 6:30, Maxine returned home. She was not expecting anything out of the ordinary, but as she approached the door, she found it locked from the inside. Unable to get in, she entered through the back window. What she encountered inside the flat shattered her. The bathroom was in complete disarray. Items were overturned, and the floor bore signs of a violent struggle. There, she found Alice. Maxine's reaction was immediate and panicked as she called emergency services, her voice cracking with disbelief as she tried to explain the chaos in front of her. But by the time the paramedics arrived, it was too late. Alice had already suffered critical harm. What remained was a haunting silence, a shattered home, and a flurry of questions that no one yet knew how to answer. And while the police prepared to process the scene, another figure was already on the move, hundreds of miles away. By 7:30 that evening, Alice was officially pronounced deceased. The coroner would later conclude that she had suffered multiple critical injuries and lost a substantial amount of blood. The trauma was severe, and there had been no chance for intervention. The shock of what had unfolded in her quiet flat reverberated through the community, but the police moved quickly. Within hours, their investigation zeroed in on one primary suspect, Dylan. His name had already surfaced in prior complaints, and now his connection to the case became impossible to ignore. Authorities began tracking his vehicle through the National Number Plate Recognition System. A match was confirmed, showing his car traveling south from Edinburgh toward Newcastle earlier that day. Around 3:24 in the morning, Dillon arrived at the Gateshead police station. He did not turn himself in. Instead, he showed up under pressure and consented to an interview. There, he claimed he had made the journey to seek closure. He denied entering Alice's flat, insisting that she had met him outside and that they spoke briefly before she walked away. He described an exchange where Alice expressed fear, referencing stories of women harmed by former partners. He told the officers that she had accused him of potentially doing the same. His version of events seemed carefully rehearsed. Yet, as officers continued to examine the timeline, his narrative began to unravel. Surveillance footage, location data, and the vehicle tracking all contradicted his statements. His phone activity showed contact with another woman he had arranged to meet that same night. Evidence began piling up. A wristband found in his possession tested positive for traces linked to Alice. Her phone records indicated that her device had traveled north after her final known activity. Investigators were now piecing together a version of events far more disturbing than Dillon's account. But the most decisive evidence was still waiting to be discovered, buried beneath forensic detail and a pattern of obsession that no longer left room for doubt. Within hours of his arrest, Dillon was formally charged in connection with Alice's death. His trial commenced in April 2017 at Newcastle Crown Court. At first, he continued to plead not guilty, maintaining that he had done nothing to warrant such accusations. But as evidence mounted with overwhelming clarity, the foundation of his defense began to crack. It was no longer a question of what happened, but whether the court would believe his shifting version of events. Eventually, Dillon altered his story. He claimed he had gone to Alice's flat merely to retrieve personal items. According to him, a heated argument had erupted, leading to a struggle in which Alice had somehow harmed herself. He added details meant to stir sympathy, even stating that in her final moments she allegedly spoke harshly of her family. When questioned about what had gone through his mind as he witnessed the aftermath, he answered that he felt sorrow for Alice's father, suggesting he wished he could have protected her. As the court examined his past, a troubling pattern emerged. It was revealed that 3 years earlier, a different woman had obtained a restraining order against him. After their breakup, Dillon had located her in public, verbally harassed her and her new partner, and spat at them in the street. This earlier behavior had never been flagged to authorities in Alice's case, and at the time of her complaints, Northumbria police had no knowledge of the previous order. The trial lasted 11 days. After only 2 hours of jury deliberation, the verdict was reached. Dillon was found guilty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 22 years. The sentence might have been longer had he brought a weapon with him, but the court ruled that he had not arrived with intent already formed. During sentencing, Judge Paul Sloan condemned the act in the strongest terms, describing it as utterly inhumane. He emphasized that Dillon had shown no remorse throughout the proceedings, but while justice had been served in the courtroom, the deeper failures surrounding Alice's pleas for help were only beginning to surface. The loss of Alice left an emptiness that no measure of time could fill. For her family and her closest friends, life has never returned to what it once was. Every passing day brings with it the weight of knowing she should still be here, growing, laughing, and bringing joy to those around her. They often imagine the future she could have had, the lives she would have touched, and the laughter that would have echoed if she had been allowed to live the life she was building. Alice was not only loved, she was unforgettable. She had a presence that could brighten a room the moment she entered. Her spirit was generous and magnetic, her sense of humor infectious, and her ability to make others feel welcome was second nature. Her family remembers her as someone who saw the good in people, who found joy in the everyday, and who never missed a chance to bring others together. The grief they carry is quiet but unrelenting, a reflection of how deeply she is missed and how profoundly she shaped the lives of those who knew her. In the aftermath, her loved ones found purpose in pain. They spoke out about the warning signs they had missed, The subtle cues of control and stalking behavior that now seemed so clear in hindsight. They began advocating during National Stalking Awareness Week and beyond, urging for greater education and stronger recognition of such patterns. Collaborating with organizations like the Suzy Lamplugh Trust and Women's Aid, they committed to raising awareness, helping others recognize early signs, and pushing for structural change to prevent similar tragedies. Public scrutiny quickly turned toward how the case had been handled. Northumbria police launched an internal review that uncovered possible misconduct in their initial response. The matter was referred to the Independent Office for Police Conduct, leading to disciplinary action against 2 officers. The force later admitted that at the time of Alice's complaints, they had not fully understood the danger Dylan posed. But as calls for reform grew louder, another effort began quietly behind the scenes, one that would ensure Alice's voice would continue to be heard in ways no one had expected. In the wake of the public outcry, the police force issued a formal apology. An independent investigation determined that officers had failed to adequately respond to Alice's pleas for help. The Gateshead Community Safety Board conducted a domestic homicide review and confirmed what her loved ones had feared all along. Alice had been subjected to persistent stalking, and opportunities to protect her had been missed. The review put forward 20 urgent recommendations, each aimed at ensuring no other victim would be overlooked in the same way. Her parents, Sue and Clive, spoke publicly about their heartbreak. They firmly believed their daughter's death could have been prevented. From her very first call to police, Alice had made it clear that she was being followed and harassed. She had provided enough evidence to warrant concern. Yet, despite her courage in speaking up, both the police and the military had failed to act decisively. Determined to turn their pain into purpose, Sue and Clive founded the Alice Ruggles Trust to raise awareness about stalking and coercive control. Through the trust, they began a campaign not only for public education but for systemic change. They advocated for stronger legislation and immediate responses to stalking reports. They also developed free classroom resources for secondary schools across the United Kingdom, helping young people recognize warning signs in their own relationships. In 2020, their efforts were reinforced when the government introduced stalking protection orders. These allowed authorities to restrict contact from suspected stalkers during ongoing investigations, offering greater safety to potential victims. For Sue and Clive, the grief has not lessened with time. It has simply become a part of their everyday lives. They speak about Alice often, missing her presence in every room and every moment. Yet they also carry hope. Hope that through their work, someone else might recognize the danger early. Hope that no family will have to endure what they did. And as awareness continues to grow, a quiet but powerful shift is beginning to take root. Alice's story is a devastating reminder that silence, whether born from fear, shame, or uncertainty, can cost lives. She was vibrant, kind, full of love for others. But behind her bright smile, danger was closing in. This didn't happen because she was weak. It happened because the warning signs were misunderstood, dismissed, and ignored. And that could happen to anyone. A friend, a sister, you. Stalking and coercive control are not always loud. Sometimes, they wear the face of someone familiar. That is why recognizing the early signs, trusting your instincts, and speaking out are not just personal choices, they are acts of protection, for yourself and for others. Alice never imagined her kindness would be turned against her. Now, her story stands as a beacon for all of us. We cannot change the past, but we can make sure her voice continues to echo in every moment we choose to speak up, believe survivors, and challenge a system that still needs fixing. Let her memory lead us forward, not in grief, but in courage. Share this story, subscribe, stay informed, and be the difference.